I just want to say, the Israelites were not worse than any other generation now. Amen? How many think our generation is the worst one right now?
So far.
When we put it that way, it puts perspective on it, doesn't it? But how many of you grew up hearing about how awful the Israelites were? They were the worst people ever, right? God gave them everything, and they just failed miserably, right? I was one of those people, and you looked at the Israelites, and you're like, man, they just couldn't do anything right, could they? I don't know what it was, but it was a good thing God decided to get rid of them and get somebody else, right? Amen? Unfortunately, that's not the case, but when we look around in life, we see that every generation is bad, right? And even as we go through, we look at what's going on in our world today. It looks like everything is a whole lot worse, but I want to say also that, number one, we have more media coverage than any other generation's ever had before. Two, we have exponentially more people on the face of the planet than any other generation has had before. Also, I mean, if you think back, I think now we're supposedly pushing 8 billion people in the world. I remember when it was like 3 billion in my lifetime. So that just tells you, kind of thinking about it, how much difference. I think they said that the first billion people in the world was in 1900. The first billion. So think about that. In 120 years, we've gone from 1 billion to 8 billion. 8 times as many people. That's a lot of different people and a lot more things that could go wrong because there's a lot more people to do them. But as I've lived and grown up and been around places, I've noticed that every association I have, every connection I have, every place I've been, everything I've ever been a part of, I am constantly reminded of mankind's propensity to grumble and complain. Amen? And that's going to be the connection of our story today and our teaching today, if coming from, again, Numbers chapter 11 and chapter 12, as Brent read this today for us, and I appreciate that. Those two, that's chapter 11, all of chapter 11 and the section of chapter 12 deals with this theme of grumbling and complaining. Whether it's the children of Israel in general or Miriam and Aaron in particular. But if you would turn to Numbers 11 in verse 1 that we read earlier. Just starting in that one verse, it says, "Now when the people complained." Okay, so what was the start of this story? The people complaining. "It displeased Yehovah, for Yehovah heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of Yehovah burned among them and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp." So Yehovah consumed the outskirts of the Israelite camp. I was pondering this story, thinking about it, trying to come at it from different angles in my mind. Kind of like a detective's supposed to do to find out the solution to issues. And say that you had a wandering spirit like I have had for most of my life. And if you're like me, you constantly want to change the spot you are in the camp, right? In my situation, I like to change what part of the country I've lived in my life and try out different places. But say you're children of Israel, you're an Israelite and you're in the camp, so you're the best you can do with your wandering spirits to try different spots within the camp. One week, you're near the tabernacle. So, that's great. I get to see Yehovah's presence come in right there. Boom. I saw when Aaron was dedicated and stuff. That was pretty awesome. But the next, you were towards the edge of the camp so you could get to the bathroom quickly. Because remember, the bathrooms were kind of on the outside of the camp. So, wouldn't it be nicer to be on the outside of the camp so you can get out there and go to the restroom? Then the next week, you're in the middle of the camp next to the Joneses. Don't really like the Joneses, but oh well. But you begin seeing the Joneses and you have to deal with them and all their issues and their family and their tents just not insulated enough. And so you hear all the screaming matches and the babies crying, the dogs barking and all that stuff going on. You ever had this problem before? It sounds like people have. And you begin grumbling about not having the best spot in town anymore on the outskirts of the camp. And you're sitting in your tent, you're like talking to your wife, your husband, and maybe your children or your dog, I don't know. And you're like, man, I just wish I was still on the outside of the camp. I just don't like the Joneses, and they're just driving me crazy. And I can't get any sleep at night because their dogs are barking. And then all of a sudden you hear, ah! Off in the distance. Did everybody wake up there? Good, I hope so. Blood-curdling screams are being heard from the distant. You realize that spot you had and were complaining about not being in and able to keep is now being consumed from heaven by fire. All of a sudden, everything is in perspective, right? Why was it being consumed? Because of you and others like you complaining. What were they saying? We miss meat. We miss our food. We are wandering aimlessly. We don't have any water. I wish I was back in Egypt. You can hear all those type of things in the story. But we often complain just like this. Even while living in the most prosperous country in the world. A few weeks ago, we had men's group, and we were talking about some different things, and they're sharing. And one thing I've tried to have in my brain thinking about is I don't like being hot, okay? I'll just tell you, I sweat a lot. I don't like it. It feels yucky, and I want to be nice and cool. Other people don't like me because I have the air conditioner on. I don't know why I'm pointing to Cheryl over here. She's learned to wear a sweater around me all the time. But we here at our place here, there's been issues and no air conditioning and things like that, and the heat's been too much. Even for the coolest of people, it's been a little bit exorbitant. And I was talking about the fact that I remember people sharing about stories of individuals who were in Siberia, believers who were in Siberia during the Cold War, during the Iron Curtain and all that stuff. Soviet Union, and that in order to get together and worship Yehovah would have to go out in the middle of a forest with no building in the middle of winter and sometimes 10 below in order to worship God together. And they would do that every week and any other time they could possibly get out there to do it because they loved Yehovah and they loved each other that much. And so when I think about a little warmth here, sometimes I have to temper my brain back and say, you could be over there and freezing to death in order to get together. Would you even get together if that was the case? We often complain like these people. The interesting thing is when you think of the Israelites, did not these people understand that Yehovah was in control? And kind of shared that in the children's story a bit more. I'm going to go in a little bit different way than she went. But with all the miracles that they had faced, the supernatural events to protect Israel, I find it very difficult that things were really as bad as it sounds like the people thought it was. Especially, you wonder, well, maybe it was bad, but then you hear Moses down in verse 11 of chapter 11. He says to Yehovah, "Why have you afflicted your servant, and why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me?" Did I conceive of all these people? Did I beget them? That you should say to them, carry them in your bosom, as a guardian carries a nursing child, to the land which you swore to their fathers. Where am I going to get meat to give to all these people? For they weep all over me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. And I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. Yeah, so it sounds to me a little bit in my mind that the people were probably overly grumbling and complaining, that things weren't as bad as they thought they were, but they were really desiring to make it bad. Are there people in this world today that all they have every single day for every meal, maybe only one meal a day, is rice or oatmeal? How many of you have ever had lovely, mushy oatmeal with no salt in it? I have had this before, but you don't want to, do you?
No.
Okay? So that's bad. And this stuff says, like Ann was saying, it's like fried donuts with honey. I mean, that's a lot better sounding than nasty, mushy, bad oatmeal. Yet people all over the world, that's what they subsist on. And here people were complaining, saying, this is the worst thing I've ever had happen to me. I wish I was back in Egypt as a slave. Making bricks out of mud that I can't get, I don't have, in order to build somebody else's houses that aren't mine. I mean, this perspective, it does a lot in understanding where our position is, doesn't it? When we step back from our circumstances and we look at what God has done for us, it makes things a lot more clear, doesn't it? In verse 23, it says, and Yehovah said to Moses, has Yehovah's arm been shortened? Now you shall see whether what I say will happen to you or not. Has my arms become Tyrannosaurus Rex arms, as Eric put over here, the giant dinosaur with itty bitty arms? You know, big scary dinosaur. They used to be the greatest thing when I was growing up. Now they're just like half as good as they used to be compared to other dinosaurs. But they always had these little itty bitty arms, and now scientists go around wondering how they ever survived with itty bitty arms, you know. But God is saying, am I the guy with itty bitty arms and a big everywhere else, and I can't do anything? That's the question he poses to Moses and to the children of Israel. Because the reality is the way that they were thinking was not truth, was it? And far too often in our lives, it's easy to not think truth and to think of what is true. It often seems humans are not happy unless they are finding something to be unhappy about. You know, it sounds like an oxymoron, but it seems to be true. Nothing pleases us more than complaining about what we don't like and what things don't meet our approval. In my recent years of life in this world, two things that I have seen grow exponentially over that last, say, 15 to 20 years that show this to be true. The first one is, with big capital letters, drama. Drama. I mean, that was the, you know, when I was younger, all through high school and stuff, that was that class that kind of like odd artsy people went to, and they kind of did that thing and put on plays that every once in a while I'd go and see. That's what drama was. Now it's like this thing. It's taken on its own essence over the last 20 years. And it means like the messed up lives of people and the fact that they want to tell everybody about how messed up their lives are. And everybody else just goes, hey, that's great. Keep going. That's drama. And so what we do, we get inundated so we all feel okay with our lives on TV by reality TV shows that show all the messed up lives of all the people, and we publicize it, then we all feel good because, hey, we're all in the same boat, right? Drama. The other one is, shall we say, doomsdayers or conspiracy theorists. Now, I'm not saying there are not issues in the world and major problems, okay? I'm not saying that conspiracies and things like that, they're not some of them that are very true. However, you can't dwell on these. You can't live your life in a despair circle of constantly looking at every single conspiracy theory that comes down the pike, going, oh my goodness, that's horrible. Oh my goodness, it's horrible. If I've told this story to some of you before, forgive me as I share it with everybody else. But there was a time that I was at another congregation, and a gentleman stood up for prayer. And I had the opportunity to pray with him. And this individual I got up to stand for prayer, and he's like, I'm just so depressed. I'm so down in the dumps in my life. And you're like, what's going on? He's like, every day I look in my emails and on Facebook and things like this, and all I see is all the horrible things and all the terrible things going on with the government and all the horrible things with our economy stuff, and I just keep going, and my email is just email after email, and I look at these things, and I can't get away from it, and I just keep going day after day, and I guess that's why I'm depressed. And I'm like, yeah. You better believe if that's all you're thinking about, that's why you're depressed. You can't sit there and dwell on negativity and expect to have a life of joy and happiness. If you think about the city of Philippi in the time of the apostolic scriptures, the apostles, the city of Philippi was under the rule of the Roman Empire. It was a prosperous city, probably in relatively speaking similar to a lot of prosperous cities in the United States compared to the rest of the world. But it was under Roman rule. And if you were a believer in that city, the likelihood is that, unlike other people, because of your belief system and what you believed in and who you believed in, you were being persecuted. Maybe it was just calling you the stupid idiot that didn't believe in Mars anymore or whatever, or Venus. That was it. But maybe it was you were getting punched in the face walking down the street. Or maybe it was you went to the market to get some food and no one would sell to you. And there was no DEI and inclusion to go along, or what's the law that tells you everybody, race, creed, orientation, religion that you have to sell to them and stuff like that. There was none of that stuff in the Roman Empire. And so you didn't get food. That'd be a pretty serious thing, wouldn't it? And you were suffering persecution from the Jews, who you were hoping that you were going to go in and be a part of the synagogue and listen to Torah there, because that's where you met this Paul guy and you got to know him and you heard his faith and what his beliefs were. And then over here, though, you also got hit and knocked down by the pagans around you who used to be your friends, because you're now a believer in this guy, Yeshua, and your faith and your life and your religion's totally changed and been turned upside down compared to them. And in all this, Paul writes, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Think about those things. See, that's truth. That's God's truth. That we can look beyond the negativity and the issues that are going on in our world, the drama, to see where God is working. And like when we come here each and every week and we listen to what God has done in each of our lives, the blessings and the things, the testimonies that God has done, is an opportunity to once again praise Yehovah and to see how he is working. And that sometimes he is working in far greater than just in our little space. Sometimes in our space we don't see it. But Yah is working in other spaces, in other people's lives, all the time. The follower of Yeshua is duty-bound to rise above this natural fleshly inclination to complain. And this is something Yehovah has brought to my attention in my life lately. Something I don't remember doing when I was younger, complaining, being frustrated, angry at things maybe even. But somehow as an adult, I've allowed it to develop. I don't know if it's just because you start doing adult things. Maybe that's why we have t-shirts now that say, I don't want to adult today, because that means that there's all these issues I have to deal with, right? But if we look at our lives are full of good and bad every day. People have both positive and negative characteristics in their lives. if we focus on the bad and the negative, and then we spend our entire lives in a dark world where everything goes wrong all the time. Believe me, this week could have been one of those weeks. I mean, minor in some ways, but when you go in to get a tire balancing and rotation, and it ends up taking you 2 weeks to get lug nuts switched, that can seem like a big deal in a very frustrating, negative situation. In this type of lifestyle, everyone fails to measure up to our standards. We live with a critical attitude and negative speech. And oftentimes we can bring others down with us, while also destroying our own lives. I look at Miriam and Aaron in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam's looking at her brother and doesn't like his Ethiopian wife. Don't know why. It doesn't really say. It just says that she was an Ethiopian woman and he married her and they didn't like it. So she goes and says, why is he the leader of the children of Israel? I'm just as qualified as he is. Aaron, you're just as qualified. Let's go together and let's deal with this situation. No, it didn't work out so well. Can you imagine the gall that took, knowing that you've seen what has happened at Mount Sinai, if nothing else was around, just Mount Sinai, and the fact that Moses spent 40 days with the creator of the universe on the top of a mountain. You didn't see him. You didn't, all that stuff going on. You weren't invited. Only him. Yet you're going to challenge his authority. In chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it says, then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, has Yehovah indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And Yehovah heard of it. So we aren't given a whole lot of explanation into this whole story. Just this such little quick blurb here in verses 1 and 2. But it was something that was enough for them to want to challenge and murmur and complain against Yehovah's chosen leader, Moses. In dealing with people and counseling, two things almost always happen when dealing with issues between people. First, the counselee tries to belittle the other person. That person this, that person that person, the reason I'm having problems is this person's like this, etc., etc. The second thing is the counselee tries to compare themselves to this lowered person in order to show their superiority in the situation. See, that person did that, and that's why I did this, and see, I'm doing better than that person because this is what I reacted to their problems and their issues. But when we complain and act negatively in life, we aren't doing this to other humans. It's not to that other person that we're having the issue. The reality is we're having it with Yehovah. Because that person is a person that God has created. Right? And when we have issues with that person, we do have issues. I'm not saying that you're not going to have issues with people, okay? So I'm not going to that point. But when we complain and murmur about the situation and aren't striving to do what God says to do to fix it, then we're bringing God down and saying, see, you're not working in this situation. You're failing God in this situation. We are bringing him down to our finite level, and we subconsciously want to bring the ruler of the universe down to our level as if he has to explain himself to us. Isn't that what the children of Israel were doing? Why aren't you doing this for us? And why aren't you doing that? Could they see the future? Could they see where God's plan was leading? No. And so they wanted to usurp that authority and say, I want to be in charge and do what I want to do. Now, can you imagine if 8 billion people all got to do exactly what they wanted to do? Would you want to live in that world?
No.
In all this, I want to say that Yehovah has a plan for each and every one of you and me. Yehovah has a plan, folks. As I read about the Israelites in the wilderness, I often get frustrated for them. I ask, why did God let them be thirsty, hungry, attacked, etc.? And maybe you've done that too. Have you ever read the stories like today and go, God, why did you let that happen? The truth is, though, that would Yehovah bring them out with so many signs and miracles from Egypt to not have a plan for them in the wilderness? Would Yehovah bring them out from where they were at in Egypt without having a plan for them in the wilderness? Did their golden calf take him by surprise? Did their complaining and murmuring here? Did their issues with the bronze serpent, at the time of the bronze serpent, any of those times, did those catch Yehovah by surprise? No. Could he deal with these things? Manna, meat, water, yes. We don't get to see all the blessings of God's wonderful plan for his people because the people continuously complained. The children of Israel continuously complained, so we never got to see the fullness of what God's plan was. Can we honestly believe that Yehovah ever ships us to the wilderness without a plan and a desire to bless us? Paul encourages his readers in Philippi to do all things without murmuring or arguing. If you want to turn to Philippians 2. Verses 12 through 16. Says, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Messiah, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. So Paul here is writing to this congregation, this fellowship of believers in Philippi, and saying, do all things without murmuring and complaining, but with fear and trembling work out your salvation amongst each other and amongst your community, amongst the pagans, amongst your generation, which, what did he call it, that generation? Crooked and perverse, right? Just like we would call our generation today, amen? So complaining and murmuring, along with, we see these two words, complaining and murmuring, along with, I'm going to add two more, slander and gossip, are all forms of what is called evil speech. In the Hebrews like to call this lashon hara, or the tongue of evil. All right? It not only can bring evil in the lives of others, especially when you're living in community, but it also damages yourself. It eats at us. It eats at the person doing the complaining, and it ruins the person who's complaining life. Have you ever seen a complainer who is happy?
No.
I mean, think of it in that way. Have you ever seen a complainer who's happy? No. That goes against what their whole philosophy of how they are living is. Does anybody want to be around a chronic complainer? No. So we see truth in what Paul is saying. When we live a life that is not full of complaining, but instead is full of joy and looking at what is right in life and what is true and good, people typically want to be around us, don't they? The Didache, a book of prayers and verses for the new believer from the 2nd century, warns that grumbling and complaining is a symptom of a haughty or proud spirit and can lead to blasphemy. Now, so Didache was this booklet that they made for new believers, and it had some prayers in it, some basic Bible verses that led to principles for starting godliness, and they would give them to new believers, and then train them in it, and then they would immerse them into the body, and that was their start to growth, because they didn't have Bibles that they could hand for $10 to people and stuff like that. A Torah scroll alone would cost thousands of dollars, and that's just for the Torah, much less the rest of the scriptures. So they'd hand them this little booklet to start them out. And it said, "My child, do not be a murmurer, because it leads to blasphemy. Neither be self-willed nor evil-minded. For out of all of these blasphemies are engendered. But be meek, since the meek shall inherit the earth. Be long-suffering and merciful and genuine and gentle and good, and always trembling at the words which you have heard." So that was in this booklet they gave to new believers on how they were to live according to the Word of God. Again, Yehovah has a plan for you. Like the children of Israel, there often is a great deal of baggage. We often call it sin that needs to be let go. Yehovah uses circumstances and struggles to cleanse us of that unrighteousness, to clean us out that we may be holy or set apart for him. However, he also uses both positive and negative experiences to grow and mature us. My desire for us today, for myself and for each and every one of us here, is don't fight God's training. Embrace it and allow it to grow you. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 says, excuse me, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." So we see that Yehovah has a plan for us. He wants to grow us. He wants to mature us into godly believers. What I desire to share out of all this today is that we need to be thankful followers. We need to be thankful followers. Being a person of drama, of grumbling and complaining, is a sign of weak faith. A person with strong faith and trust has the following characteristics: confidence that Yehovah is in charge, a knowledge that he's working all things for good, and he is not given to complaining because this person is not given to complaining because he believes that everything is ultimately in the hands of the Father. So what's the antidote for a murmuring spirit? Gratitude. Gratitude. When we force ourselves to focus on the good and positive and thank Yah for all blessings he bestows on us, the way we experience life is transformed. I'd like to say real quick, those that know Bill, I've heard many people express this to me personally, so I will say what others have shared with me. They enjoy Bill and they appreciate it. Not that the people haven't shared that, because his positive outlook on life and his blessings and thanking Yah are contagious. His joy and understanding of what Yah has done for him oozes to other people. And that is a challenge to myself in the way I do things. I'm not quite as bubbly as him. I'm not quite as exciting as Bill is. But that doesn't mean that I cannot grab some of what he's done and internalize it in my life, that I can be joyful. I may not be as bubbly, but I can be joyful and thankful just like he is. And I know he's not here today, but so maybe that's a good thing he's not here today. But because he'd be like, no. But yes, he is very good at this. Psalm 34, verses 12 through 14 says, "Who is the man who desires life and loves many days, that he may see good. Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. So when we have to look for the blessings, look for the things that God is doing, and rejoice and be thankful to God for what he's doing. However, don't thank God for just the good. Don't thank God for just the good. We should thank him for everything, whether it's messed up lug nuts or broken windshields or cancer or heart attacks or whatever it may be. We need to be thankful to him in everything. Paul writes the following concluding statement to the fellowship at Thessalonica, which connects down through the ages to us here at Solel. He says, "And we urge you, my dearly beloved brethren, to recognize those who labor among you and are over you in Yehovah and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake. Be at peace among yourselves. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good both for yourselves and for all. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks, for this is the will of Yehovah and Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah, for you. Do not quench the Spirit of God. Do not despise prophecies. Test all things. Hold fast what is good. Abstain from evil, from every form of evil. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved blameless at the coming of our Master, Yeshua the Messiah. He who calls you is faithful, who also will do it." That's a powerful ending there. He kind of culminates all of this that he's talking about and shares it with these people. Don't murmur, don't complain, be joyful, be excited, live together as brothers and sisters in Messiah, rejoice together, and live like the Master Yeshua. Very succinct summation of all that. Paul loves to talk like this, though. He says it again, going back to Philippi. He shares with that fellowship of believers again in chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. He says, "Rejoice in Yehovah always. Again, I say rejoice." He's like punching it out there, isn't he? Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Does everybody know that song? All right. Remember from Sunday school, those of you that have been there? Rejoice in Yehovah always. And again, I say rejoice. He really wants to punch that statement forward. Let your gentleness be known to all men. Yehovah is at hand. How many of you think Yehovah is at hand? Okay. Paul did too. Just kind of keep that in mind a little bit. Although I think it's more at hand today than it was when he was there. All right. But Yehovah is at hand, so be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to Yehovah. And the peace of our God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through our Messiah, Yeshua. So let us see the struggles of the Israelites in the wilderness and strive to learn from their examples. Let us turn from complaining and drama. Turn our backs on the messages of the world and instead look to rejoice in our loving God and his will and plan for our lives. As Paul again writes in 1 Corinthians 10, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers, the children of Israel, were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was the Messiah. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, nor complain as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation is overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Shabbat shalom.